Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Amy Phoenix. We are here today with Jessica Van Horn and Sam Price. Jessica was raised by her parents with two sisters in a small Michigan community. Her father, who was an alcoholic all her life, made a tremendous impact on her life in both positive and negative ways. After high school, Jessica moved to Sault Ste. Marie, graduating with her bachelor's degree in psychology in 2012. Working at a residential treatment center where she realized she was in over her head in more ways than one, Jessica chose to come home. As she worked on her master's degree in social work with Michigan State University, she started working at 1016 Recovery Network in Midland. First at detox and outpatient, then moving into a therapy role. She is now the community engagement manager of the Midland outpatient site for 1016 and works hard to advocate, educate, and engage the community in fighting the stigma of addiction. Jessica credits witnessing her father's struggle with mental health and addiction as what fueled her passion for change, and continues to fuel her passion for helping others, advocating, and fighting for change. A native of Midland, Sam Price has been the president and CEO for the 1016 Recovery Network since 2003, providing services in 20 locations across 10 counties in mid-Michigan. 1016 is the leading regional provider of prevention, treatment, and support services for people struggling with substance abuse disorders. They are known for pioneering new services, including collegiate recovery programs, and embedding recovery coaches in hospital emergency departments. He has served on a number of regional and state boards, including Governor Whitmer's Opioid Task Force Stakeholder Advisory Group. Prior to his work at 1016, Sam has held leadership positions at agencies in the community mental health system, child welfare, human services, and served as a youth pastor. He has a bachelor's degree in business from Central Michigan University and 2 master's degrees, one in religion with Asbury Theological Seminary, and one in marriage and family therapy with Michigan State University. Sam lives in Midland with his wife, Sue, and has 2 children, Haley, a teacher in Cleveland, and Ben, pursuing his master's at Cardiff University in Wales. So welcome. Today we are here with Jessica Van Horn and Sam Price. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yeah. We would love to start by inviting you to tell us more about yourselves. So it can be anything, what gets you up in the morning, a little bit of your story, your background here in this area. And Sam, would you like to begin?
Sure. So I've been with 1016 for almost 20 years now. My wife and I moved back to Midland in 2003 when our children were small. We both grew up in Midland, and then we're down in the mid-state area. And then because of some family health issues, we decided to move back home to be closer with some aging parents. And the 1016 opportunity opened its door, which fit really well because I came from a human services background. And so I've been here ever since and have just seen the organization grow and grow over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Harrison, so not too far away from here. I went to school in Sault Ste. Marie after I graduated from high school. And when I moved back down this way, started working for 1016, originally in our detox program. So I've been with 1016 for 7 years now. And I recently got a promotion. I'm the community engagement manager here in our Midland office now. And I moved to Midland in the middle of COVID. I bought a house in the middle of COVID. So I moved here in 2020. It's been a great experience moving to Midland. I was living in Clare and got sick of my commute and headed this way. So it was a good decision.
All right, glad. I'm glad that you're liking it here in Midland so far.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so thanks for sharing a little bit about yourselves and your work here with 1016. we are going to go into this topic of substance use disorder and the family and how that impacts families. We're going to hear your story, Jessica. But before we do, what are some terms and phrases that we need to be aware of and how they're used in the community related to this topic? Maybe ones that we want to stay away from, and also the ones that we want to have a real accurate understanding of. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, certainly we're trying to stay very sensitive to language because language certainly conveys a lot of meaning. It can reinforce a lot of the shame and the stigma that people experience when they are struggling with a problematic relationship with drugs or alcohol. So terms like addict and alcoholic can often be, feel and perceived as kind of blaming or shaming when we talk about individuals with that disorder. And we really even try and shape it up that this really is, it's a medical condition that people are experiencing that may be behaviorally driven in the same way for somebody who is a diabetic or asthmatic, where it's a medical condition, but a lot of how they maintain their wellness has to do with the choices, the behavioral choices that they're making. So we really try and focus on discussing substance use disorder as a category as opposed to substance abuse, because even that has a negative connotation within it. And it's also inferring that people have control and choice in these matters. And for many of the people that we are working with, choice has been kind of taken away from them a long time ago because of how their neural pathways in their brains have been changed and reshaped by these substances and these ongoing habits.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for elaborating on that. All right, Jessica, we are here to hear your story about this topic and your personal story. And so I just want to open this up for you to share what you'd like to share.
Okay. I was raised, like I said, in Harrison, so a small town about 45 minutes north of here. I have two older sisters, so it was the three of us and both of my parents growing up. My mom was disabled in a car accident when she was pregnant with me, so she did not work. So primarily my family lived off of my mother's disability. So a family of 5 living off of my mom's disability and like state aid alone made for difficult times for our family. And then my dad was an alcoholic. So when I was growing up, it was primarily alcohol and marijuana, but our lives were centered around that. Family get-togethers, right? Normal Christmas parties. Dad either wouldn't be a part of those because he didn't want to be around certain parts of the family, or he would be there and he would be really intoxicated. Most of my family was in like the Standish area. So if you guys have ever drove from Harrison to Standish, it is a straight shot down 61. And we, to this day, like I can drive down 61 and I can tell you like all of the spots where we'd have to pull off because like Dad would be intoxicated on the way home and he'd have to pee, right? Like he'd be drinking, so he had to pee. And there's all these little 2 tracks because you're driving through the middle of nowhere. And so like we would, and like that's like childhood memories, right? As you drive down 61 and you see like these 2 tracks and you're like, oh yeah, like I remember pulling off there. And oh yeah, I remember pulling off there. As an adult, I understand a lot more about what my dad was going through. Working at 1016, I've learned a lot more about what my dad was going through. As a child, you don't, right? As a child, we had no idea why alcohol always took the priority over everything else in our family. And I mean everything, right? Like us going to school events, us having food on the table. Like there would always be beer in the fridge, but if I needed $5 to go on a school field trip, like I was the one taking in like quarters to the school to be able to go on this field trip. So it was hard because my friends didn't get that, right? So they had, to me, successful parents, right? Like people that went to work every day and people that supplied their families with what they needed, and that's not how I was raised. I started working at a very young age so that I could buy like school clothes and I would be able to do things with my family and with my friends that Like without doing that, like without getting a job, I wouldn't have been able to do those things. A lot of my experiences as a teenager were things that I paid for, which teaches you a lot of really cool, valuable lessons, right? Like I am pretty self-sufficient and I've been that way, very determined, learned those things for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't all bad. Dad was not all bad. So when I talk about this, I don't want anybody to think that there's a deeper appreciation for the good times that I did have with him now that he's not with us. But he was also a very mean drunk. So very abusive, more towards my mom physically. But we witnessed all of that. And I can remember hiding. I was the little sister. I am the little sister. So my big sisters were always very protective of me. But I remember like hiding behind them. I remember hiding in bedrooms. I remember hiding outside behind trees. There's all of these events. There's all of these things. Like I could tell you my favorite hiding spots, the ones that I felt safest in. Because he was scary. He was really scary. And he was very emotionally abusive to us, which I think is probably the biggest thing that's carried with me as an adult. When you're told repetitively things like that you're not good enough or you're not going to be successful, called things that a father really should not call his daughter, that I won't repeat, it sticks with you and it carries with you. And I went through periods as a teenager. My sisters are 7 and 8 years older than me. So as I'm going into middle school, they're graduating from high school and leaving. And I felt so abandoned by them. Get it now, right? As an adult, I would have probably done the same thing. But I was alone with my parents for like 5 or 6 years, which was also a completely different experience. There was nobody for me to hide behind. There was nobody to protect me the way that my sisters had protected me through all of this. And I went through a period of like self-harm and being suicidal, hiding that from my mom because I didn't want my mom to find out because she was already dealing with dad. And so if she's dealing with dad, I don't want her to also be worried about me. So then just all of the things, just carrying all of this around with me. Being super busy, right? I was in band, I played sports, I did all of the things. I didn't want to be at home. So I did all of these things because I didn't want to be at home. And that meant band concerts and practices and games and team sleepovers and all of the stuff. So I just didn't have to be at home. And my teachers, right, are looking at this like, these Van Horn girls are so involved. No, we just don't want to go home. Like, we just don't want to go home. And I think back and I think there's no way people didn't realize that things were going on. There's no way my neighbors didn't know that things were going on. Nobody cared. Our own family didn't even care. They just isolated us. My mom, most of my mom's side of the family, with the exception of my grandma, who was really ill by the time I was like probably 10 or 11, just didn't come around. And as an adult, that infuriates me. Like, you knew what me and my sisters were going through. You knew what your sister was going through, and you just didn't care. So as an adult, I have more resentment for people like that in my family and in my life than I actually do for my dad today, which is saying something. But that's come with a lot of self-care, a lot of reflection, a lot of therapy, a lot of things that have come along with that. That was very long, but
Yeah, thank you for sharing the heart of your story, growing up with that in your family, and I really hear the isolation of it. Mm-hmm. And how you could see that people could tell something, they must have been able to tell something was going on, and yet there wasn't that support there.
One of my best friends growing up, her mom was like the resource officer at the high school. She actually arrested my dad at one point. It's not funny, but he scared me so bad one night that I ran down the road and asked the neighbors to call the cops. On summer vacation, the resource officers are on road patrol. So when I called, she is actually the one that came and arrested him. And the only thing that did was make it so that that particular friend couldn't do anything with my family. Like, if I asked her, like, hey, we're going to go camping, she'd say, oh, no, remember that one time I arrested Jessica's dad? Like, yeah, we all know that one time you arrested Jessica's dad, but that's not a Jessica problem, right? And some of these things my dad wouldn't even be involved in. And then it became that, right? So then instead of helping, we became like that stereotype, like, oh, you stay away from the Van Horn family. Like, what a yucky place to be as a kid, because I knew.
Absolutely. So you were there with that awareness that this isn't healthy. I've seen this, and then the community members kind of putting a distance between you and your family and them. And what you really needed was that support.
Yeah, so then Harrison, it was like $3 or something to get into like volleyball games and things like that. And when we were poor, like, we were poor. And so my mom would come to sporting events really early, and she would try to like come in before like they would start taking tickets so that she could watch our sporting events. Like, the school literally kicked her out before. Like, right? Like, let's not ask questions, or like, let's not ask why this lady's showing up 2 hours early for a volleyball game that's only going to last 45 minutes. They literally kicked her out of the gym a couple of times, which is super mortifying for my mom. But like, then for me, as like, I'm watching this happen, like, oh, like, you're really not going to let her stay. Okay. So Harrison in general was not a supportive community.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm really hearing that as you say that, these different aspects of it, the school, the families that were aware of it. Then you said you had some people in your own family that were aware but not able to directly do anything. Wondering how that's contributed to just the carrying of shame and stigma along the way for you, and what you have needed to do to be able to work through that as an adult now.
It comes with like a lot of self stuff. It comes with a lot of like shame for my family as a teenager, right? Like, it's just embarrassing, right? Like, it's embarrassing that we don't have $3 so you can come to this volleyball game. It's embarrassing that I have to tell my friends that I can't come to this event because we can't afford it. And I would just lie, right? I would just lie. Like, oh no, like, family reunion. You know how many family reunions I had in high school, guys? Like, didn't talk to half my family, but whoo, did we have a lot of family reunions. And so, like, just things like that then become like defense mechanisms. So then it's like, it's undoing all of that stuff. It's learning how to like tell the truth, because there's not always weird consequences to telling the truth. It's owning the pieces of my story that sucked, because if I didn't live that, I wouldn't be here. It's an appreciation that, like, I get to sit across the room every day from people who are struggling with the same things that my dad struggled with, and being able to walk through that with them, because they're at a place where like there's acceptance and a want for help. Then unfortunately my dad never hit that spot. But to see people get back on track, and to see people become parents and siblings and all of the things, like, that just kind of refills that cup. People didn't really actually know that I had a dad in high school. So like, that part of it, I didn't deal with a lot of the stigma. My neighbors knew, but they just didn't care. They just avoided us, right? Like, we were that house. And as an adult, like, my dad just was never really present. So he didn't come to graduations. I've graduated from high school. I've graduated with my undergrad. I've graduated with a master's degree. He wasn't there for any of those things. Never at a softball game, never at a band concert, things like that, people just didn't know. I remember in high school, one of the girls on my softball team, they stopped doing two-way transportation. And so parents would have to bring us home from sporting events. And my mom would always go. At this point, I'm not sure what happened. Maybe my sisters were helping us out. But at this point, like financially, like she was able to actually come to those things. But I remember one of the girls on my softball team, when the coach asked, like, hey, Van Horn, is your parents coming to the game? Just making sure that all of the teammates would have a ride home. One of the girls just snarkily saying, like, you have a dad? And just being like, oh, yeah, I do. Like, yeah, I do. Like, of course I do, you guys. Of course I have a father. But, like, things like that, like, I just remember that, right? I remember that moment and, like, how gross that felt and how, like, sad it made me that, like, these people I had been in school with for 15 years didn't realize, yep, in fact, there is a guy at home that Jessica calls dad. That's how uninvolved he was with us, with all of us.
Yeah. It sounds like, and you make those connections now between, okay, he was experiencing this disorder, but then there wasn't this information that you have now.
Right.
So it was this continual back and forth between I'm living my life in school and this and that, and my home life is this other way.
Two completely different lives. From, like, probably the time I was, like, 7, honestly, till, like, probably 10 years ago, right? Just hiding that part of myself.
Oh, what has it been like to open up that space inside yourself that had to be hidden, you know, that story in the last 7 years plus?
So I went through a horrendous breakup. Like, just worst thing ever. And I was working for 1016, and we were downtown still. And I remember, like, having a Jessica pity party. And one of our recovery coaches looked at me and said, ooh, Jess, you're an ACA. And I was like, I'm a what? And I had no idea what she was talking about. And then she explained it to me, that there is actually this whole program built around people who are adult children of alcoholics or, like, other dysfunctional families, I think is the actual title. And she Googled it, and she showed me all this stuff, and I was like, ooh, I have a thing. And, like, going to my first meeting, it was like, oh my gosh, like, people get this. And I just cried. I didn't even, like, say anything. I just cried because it was like, oh my gosh, like, you guys understand. Like, you get what this felt like and what this feels like. And kind of from that point, I've gone to therapy. I'm still in therapy. She's a wonderful lady, but the thing that I've learned is that it creeps up on me. My dad passed away 2 years ago, kind of as a result of his substance use and mental health. So those two things combined, we lost him in October of 2020. And so since then, I got back in therapy and, like, just trying to unravel all of this stuff. There's just an appreciation. There's an appreciation, A, that people understand. There's a want for people to not feel the way that I felt. There's a want to give opportunities to people that weren't given to my family. Like I said, we were just kind of ostracized, and it was not a good feeling. It was not fun. There was nothing enjoyable about it. The second I graduated from high school, right, like, my best friends in high school, like, didn't want anything to do with me, right? So it was just all of this, like, reflection as you get older about, like, where you're at and what you've been through. To be able to talk about it today and not, like, cry or, like, be embarrassed, it feels powerful. It feels freeing, and it feels really good to just be honest about where you came from and like the way that it's impacted you. And honestly, like probably would not feel the way that I feel about any of this if I was not at 1016. From the recovery coach that kind of opened my eyes to like, hey, this is a thing, to she's the one that sent me to my first meeting. She's the one that sent me to the first ACA meeting, to I had a wonderful supervisor up until March when she retired that was just like lovingly would call me on my crap and be like, hey, like let's check where that's coming from, because those weird defense mechanisms come out sometimes when I don't want them to, or when I don't even realize it, because it's habit, it's ritual. That's what I'm used to. Like I have to protect myself. And she was just very like, hey, like that's old stuff. And I'd be like, okay. Being able to talk about it is freeing.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your example and experiences with that for people who may be listening and don't have those resources in mind, and the freedom that can come through having that understanding and that direct support in that way, and for your vulnerability and sharing about the loss and just all that this has brought for you. Yeah. Sam, I want to ask you a question just in reflection of what Jessica is sharing. And with 1016, what is some of the backstory for the 1016 Recovery Network and how it's grown over the years and supports people who are directly experiencing substance use disorder and or families, who are impacted by this?
Sure. So first, before I go there, I want to thank Jessica again so much for being so vulnerable, because when you just take the time to reflect on the resiliency and the power that she and the agency that she has brought into her own life, and even just all the different things that she has done to thrive in spite of the circumstances to where she is now. Just all the little nuggets, whether it's, she could have withered, but she got involved. She got around positive adults. She got around positive peers. So there was something within her and within her sisters that not everyone has had the fortune of doing. But you can see then how marvelous it is that she is where she is, and how she's then kind of using those experiences for good. And I think that's a credit for taking all that crappy pain that you've been through and turning it into purpose, which I think is one of the most powerful things that we get to see with the folks that we work with, is how they take their own brokenness and can turn that for good. Because I can't undo what I've experienced. I can't undo hiding in the woods, because I just even had to think that as Jess is talking about this, I know she's reliving all of those right in real time, right? All those feelings of being that small young kid. And yet, what I get to see that folks listening to this don't is the look on her face and the pride in her face and in her eyes and in her smile, that is not defining who she is, that she is defining herself through that lens in a way that gives her power, rather than being under the power of that childhood, if that makes some sense. And to use that then as a backstory, that's really what our organization is all about. We were started over 40 years ago by 9 local churches who had just started the Open Door homeless shelter. And many of those same folks thought, well, we need a place for people who are trying to rebuild their lives to also have a place. We didn't have a halfway house at that time. And so some of those same churches got together and started the 1016 home. And so when I got here in 2003, we had that facility on the corner of Eastman and Carpenter. And then we had an outpatient practice here. And then we had a small counseling office over in Mount Pleasant. And in the last 20 years, through the dedication and work of people like Jessica, we have been able to grow to where we are now in 8 different counties. with 9 different programs in 20 different locations, trying to find different ways that we can engage people into that change process. And whether it's by being in the schools so that we can reach out to the young Jessicas and give them skills to cope with living in a family like that, or to give them skills to not start experimenting and be around positive peers and whatnot, to being there to be in the hospital with somebody who may have a unreported substance use disorder. You know, maybe they're there for a twisted ankle because they fell off the ladder, but they didn't happen to mention to the nurse that they fell off the ladder because they've been addicted to Vicodin for the last 3 years because of an accident at work, required back surgery. And we can have conversations with those folks about, hey, we see how this relationship with this medication is not healthy for you. While it's doing some good things for you as far as taking away your pain, it's also creating other pain over here in your life. Have you ever considered talking with a therapist like Jessica, or talking with a person who has their own lived experience, who have walked in your shoes and have figured out how to turn that around, and bringing them into the fold, as well as then places like the Recovery Center where you can just pop in at any time and start a conversation. Because one of the things that we have found most frequently is that because of that shame and because of that stigma, people either don't know where to go, don't know what to ask, they don't know how to start. And they don't know how to start looking for that, you know. And so we try and make it as easy as possible and as friendly as possible to just come in and have the conversation, come in and have the relationship without that fear, without that judgment. So that, you know, like when they call here and James is picking up the phone, James is a person in long-term recovery. So the very first person I'm talking to when you call 1016 is somebody who understands that journey, understands that pain, can relate to that hurt, can relate to that small child. And what I know is that takes that tension off that person and makes it okay to start sharing more and feeling that it's just like when, you know, Jess walked into that first ACA meeting. You people get me. There's nothing embarrassing or shameful for me to say what I'm about to say, or because of what I lived, because everyone in this room has been in that same space. And so it's safe for me to be vulnerable and to let down those defense mechanisms and start working through the things so that I can get to a point where who I want to be rather than who I keep being because of what this substance does for me or doesn't do for me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that backstory for us to understand where the spirit of this network and this space and all the extensions of it around. Right. A question is coming to me for both of you here, and then we'll touch directly into, you know, specific services also. We've talked about judgment and shame, and you talked about the openness so that people will come, feel welcome to come and have that conversation. What do you see as the impact of that on that person who is either a child or a family member and they've been experiencing the effects of this, or the person who's in the midst of it? What is the impact of pulling back, taking this other approach that is more, I mean, we're obviously learning more about it in the mental health and the medical fields and all of that. What do you see actually happening? You've described some of your experience, Jessica, but what else are you seeing and how important that is as we approach recovery this way?
Well, I think since we have kind of shifted towards this more open model where we're trying to be as transparent and engaging as possible, I think we have found that it has allowed us to help people connect with each other, develop a greater sense of community. Because one of the things that, as Jess was describing, one of the things that happens by choice and by force is isolation. People shun me because they don't want to deal with that drama or whatever, or they don't want their kids around that stuff. Or, I select out because I don't want to be confronted by some of those shameful types of things or have to deal with all the negative stuff or come up with excuses. So either way, it creates all this isolation. So by trying to open the doors more, then people connect with more folks like me who understand that walk and that journey. And so what we have found is that we have more people seeking us out. We have more people who may come back because maybe things were going well, but then some new stressor came along and I started falling back into some unhealthy ways. But I know that here's a place where it's safe for me to talk about that. Because even if I have a relapse, that can be its own kind of shame and triggering type of an event, right? I had it all worked out. I've had, 4 months of sobriety behind my belt. And then all of a sudden, this happened. And next thing you know, I'm drinking again, or drank for a weekend. So that has really changed the dynamic. And we see that people also stick with us longer because I think they're finding the answers to what they need. They're being able to start seeing that their life can be different, that they don't have to be defined by that past. They can begin to see what that new future can really be. And they stick around longer to realize that, so that it's becoming more tangible and more real for them, to the point that some then come back and work for us, which has always been really cool when we've had some of our graduates who have really thrived, and then 3 years later, all of a sudden they're working alongside us as a coach or a therapist or something like that.
Thank you. I think one of the coolest things that 1016 offers to all the communities that we serve is just this space, right? So for me, it was really about never feeling safe somewhere. And we've created that in all of our outpatient sites, right? Our clients are more than welcome. You don't even have to be a client. You can pop in and hang out with us and watch TV and drink coffee. And if you just need somewhere to feel safe for a couple of hours, or if you need to chill with us all day long, we're going to feed you lunch because we're going to make you go to a meeting at noon, right? Things like that providing that safe space for someone, I know how valuable that is. And the fact that I get to be a part of that for people now. And it happens. We have people that have had bad days that just come and sit on the couch and drink coffee and watch TV and just chill because they know today if I'm here, I'm not going to get high, or I'm not going to have to deal with X, Y, and Z because I'm safe where I'm at right now. And I love being able to provide that for our community.
And that's materially different than most other outpatient clinics, because that's very much set up like a doctor's office, and I am able to come into the building when it's my scheduled appointment, and that's it. And we used to operate that way ourselves too. And it's one of those things why are we doing this? If somebody needs that safe space, why wouldn't we want them to be here? Why would we say, I'm sorry, your appointment's on Thursday, so I'll see you at 1:30. I might be able to squeeze you in a little bit earlier, so I'm sorry you're spinning in a crisis right now. It's so cruel in some ways when we think that we're asking people to manage these years of brokenness and handle them in these little 1 hour increments of life where we dispense our wisdom. Come on. It's no, that's not how life works. That's not how healing works. And so healing's not going to take place if we're not creating the space, like Jess says, and making it safe, like Jess was talking about, for folks to just be. And sometimes just being present and being able to sit through that discomfort in my heart and know that I didn't use and didn't pick up and I'm okay, can have almost more impact than sitting with a therapist for an hour because I did it on my own. Now we can provide the space for that, but I can never take that away from you because you showed that I can live with this and I can get through it without it picking up, to take that pain away, because that's normally why I do this, is to take away that pain. That's how I responded before. And so being able to facilitate that, I mean, ultimately that really is kind of drives whatever we do, is how do we help build that personal agency within the context of a larger community trying to all do that same thing.
Definitely powerful approach, for sure, that we don't see everywhere. And it's beautiful to know that it's happening here. Yeah. For me, listening and having a more in-depth understanding here today from what you're both sharing. What other services, while we're on the topic of 1016, and then I want to come back to a couple of points with you, Jessica, what other services specifically would it be helpful for people to be aware of that are offered through 1016? I mean, what you just shared right here is huge. Yeah. I hope everybody that's listening and then is maybe sharing 1016 with others shares the piece that we just went through, because that was really significant. What else?
So I'll rip through the list. We have our prevention services in Clare and Gladwin and Mount Pleasant and Big Rapids and Reed City, where we're working in the schools. We're working with other coalitions in the community about improving the quality of life for all of us, because we want everyone to have meaning and purpose without having to rely on those kind of substances to make it possible. We have a collegiate recovery program at CMU and at Ferris and at Mid-Michigan Community College, where we both support students who may have started to experiment or use in a way that's starting to threaten their academic success. And we also work with students who are in recovery, where being on a college campus is actually a threat to them, because it's not an easy environment to try and get my degree when there's so much rampant use among so many, it's so normalized there. So we've had that in place. Our program in the emergency department, we're in 6 EDs with My Michigan Health here in Midland, Clare, Gladwin, West Branch, soon to be Bay City. We're in 2 at Spectrum Health in Reed City and Big Rapids. That's, again, where we're inviting those patients into these conversations, because one of the things that's important to understand is that 1 in 10 people, if they were being honest about their relationship with alcohol and drugs, would screen positive for a substance use disorder. 1 in 10 adults. But only 10% of those ever walk through our doors. And most of the time they're walking through our doors because somebody's forcing them to. Either a judge, a spouse, an employer says, you either get it right or you're going to lose your job, your home, your marriage, whatever. So one of the things that started us going to the campus and going to the emergency department is like, well, how do we get in front of that missing 90%? Because of that 90% that's not walking through our doors, most of them believe that their problem is not so significant that they need professional help, like Jessica's dad. He didn't get to that point where he felt that he needed help, but you talk to anyone around him and they say, come on. So rather than just waiting for them to come to us, we started going to them and just start talking about what's the good that comes from your use and what's the bad. And does the bad outweigh the good? And have you ever thought about changing? And then we start that conversation. We try and get them introduced to that recovery center where it's safe to explore that. We have our 4 recovery centers, like here in Midland, Clare, Gladwin, Big Rapids, where that drop-in space is available. We have a residential program out on M20 where a person, if their life is so out of control, they need a structured environment to really just get grounded because they can't string 2 days together of sobriety without using. And they need that kind of space. Then they come stay with us for typically around a month and then transition to the recovery center as they go home and keep working on it. We also know that some people can't go home because it's not a safe place for them to be. So here in Midland, we have a 14-bed recovery house for men. That's the old 1016 home that Jessica manages, as well as a 7-bed home for women who can stay there up to 2 years if they want, if they need that structured environment, that supportive environment to really get grounded and rooted in their healing and in their recovery skills and recovery habits. Then they can come and stay with us in those spaces until it's safe, or they found a new safe space, a new safe relationships to be able to advance into their independent living. So, but it's all with this theme of healing and being able to turn your life to the place where you can do kind of positive things.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam, for filling us in, and Jessica for...
Oh, I forgot something.
Oh, yes.
We have 2 programs over in Saginaw and Bay City where we actually have a very cool partnership with the Great Lakes Bay Health Centers. So they're a primary care facility that also happens to have counselors, but they don't have recovery coaches. And so when they learned about what we were doing here in Midland, they said, our funding doesn't allow for this. So could we partner together? And so we actually have an integrated center where some of our staff are working in their facility. So they provide the medical care, they provide the counseling, and then we provide the recovery coaching in this kind of integrated fashion. So it's almost truly a one-stop shop for mental health, physical health, and their substance use recovery. And we do that together in both Saginaw and Bay City. And then to kind of reciprocate that partnership, they then bring a medical bus here to Midland and are here every Tuesday so that their physicians are available to our clients here if they need to see a doctor for some medical care issues, if they need to get an antidepressant as a part of their recovery, then they can also get that through here too.
Such wonderful collaborations happening throughout the area,
right,
and expanding in that. Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. All right. So, Jessica, we've talked about some of your story and about the resources that are available here with 1016. And I remember when we talked on the phone too, you were sharing like it's been quite a healing journey, and you shared a lot of the pieces of that story. I'm wondering if we can just take a peek into some aspects, looking back, what would have been helpful in some ways, maybe from the person at school or the police officer or the neighbors, and maybe if not specifically those people, but also what you're seeing with families and youth. Like, how can those people who are close to them in their lives actually be supportive in ways that those people can feel, and it will change things for them?
I think the hardest part was I was a kid, right? So this was not things that I was choosing. This was not what I was choosing my life to look like. I didn't want to go home and walk on eggshells and eat dinner by myself in my bedroom, or, right? Like, I didn't want to do those things. And we punish the family, right? We punish the family as a unit. You're one of those kids. You belong to that family. We don't talk to the so-and-so family because they're bad people. And we, as a society, do a really good job as a unit, right? Like, this family is a unit. So, like, if mom and dad are bad, the kids must be bad too. We weren't bad kids. We didn't pick this. I didn't want to go home and live like that. I didn't want my parents to have to live like that. I can remember the night that I called the police on my dad going to bed crying, asking my mom when he got to come home, right? Like, that's how conflicted as a kid you are in this situation, because I know this isn't healthy. And I was scared enough to go to the neighbors to do this, but also it's normal. So, like, when's dad coming home? And how mad is he going to be that I did this? But also in my family, you woke up the next morning and you pretended like nothing ever happened. So dad came home from jail the next day, and, like, thank God, like, apparently that rule applied to me too, because we just never talked about it. I thought about it. I thought about all of those things, but we never talked about them. We never processed anything as a family. So then you're just carrying all of that around. And you know your best friend knows that her mom arrested your dad over the weekend. Like, you know these things, right? But then you just don't talk about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I think kids aren't choosing to grow up in bad situations. Just because a parent is making a bad choice doesn't mean that the kids are going to make bad choices or that they don't deserve to be supported. Honestly, I just wish somebody would have asked me. At any point in my life, if somebody would have just asked me, hey, how are things at home? Just to be able to share something about any of that experience, nobody ever asked me. Not a teacher, not a counselor, no. Nobody ever asked. The first time I went to therapy, my therapist, this was not the therapist I have currently, looked at me and said, hey, did you experience any trauma in your life? And I was like, no. And then he starts asking me all these questions. Yeah, I know. That's how normal this is, though, right? So he's like, well, tell me about your childhood. And so I start telling him about all this crazy stuff that happened. And I mean, like, crazy stuff. And he goes, hold on. Like, you just told me, like, 5 minutes ago that, like, there was no trauma in your life. And I was like, man, that was normal. And so then it's like the first giant smack in the face, right? Like, hey, let's take a step back and, like, actually look at this, because nothing about this was normal. He was probably the first person in my life to really smack me in the face like that, though. And I was probably 24 years old. The first time somebody was like, whew, no, like, hold on, that's not normal. And I was like, let's talk about that then.
Well, and I think what that shows is, to Jess's point, that when you grow up in that is normalized for you, because so you have not assigned a trauma definition to those experiences. But the consequences of those experiences, whether I label it that way or not, are very real. So even as Jess was saying, nobody would ask me the question. And so certainly it's one of those things that we would encourage everyone. If you think you have young people in your life that have those things, not only ask them that question, but don't ask just once. Because how long would it be, Jess, before you'd actually share the truth with somebody? Because wouldn't you want to know first that it's safe to share? So the first time or second time or third time, I might kind of gloss it over until I knew it was safe. Because what happens if I do share and then it gets back to mom or gets back to dad, because, these teachers are mandated reporters. So it's all this complex stuff. So we can't just think that, well, I did my job. I asked how it was and they said they were fine. It's like, well, we've got a greater obligation than that. If you know that kind of stuff might be going on, then why aren't you inviting them over to the house? You don't have to get into the stuff. You can create just positive experiences. You can be a positive, supportive adult and create that alternative space for that child so that they can experience something different. And who knows, over time, that may open up those conversations. It doesn't always have to be kind of these big, deep, dark talks. Sometimes it can just be saying, hey, you want to come over for pizza and a movie, with the girls on Friday night? And then just doing that in repeated behavior. There are ways that we can lean into each other's lives that way. Because when we choose to stay out of the mess, what I am then choosing to do when I ignore Jessica's plight, even though I have knowledge of it, is I am doing as much harm to her as her parents are. Because I am choosing to willfully ignore her pain. I'm choosing to willfully watch her drown and not throw a rope. And in a healthy community, we don't do that. And that's why it's so important, like from what can we all do, is we have to make it easier for all of us as adults, as humans, to talk about our hurts, whether it's substance use disorders or depression or anxiety or whatever it might be, but giving grace to each other, to be vulnerable with one another without kind of judgment or fear. Because, sorry, we all had sucky, childhoods. There's always something that we grew up with that created hurt because, we were raised by broken adults who were raised by broken adults who were raised by broken adults because, we haven't had many perfect beings on this planet for a long time. So, but we don't do that. We keep kind of the glossy sheen on and just kind of keep pumping the American dream rather than just learning how to be real with one another. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we even strive to do with each other as staff people at 1016 is to hold each other accountable, to support, to encourage, and to, Jess has the freedom to say, Sam, you're doing this. She knows what some of my unprofessional behaviors are, when some of my stuff is going wonky. And she knows what it is, and I've been free to share that with her and other members of leadership. And so when she sees those unhealthy behaviors, then she has permission, if it's impacting her, or even if it's not, to just say, time out, see something's going on. Just like she was talking about, how Marcia would bring up those defense mechanisms. But if we're not able to be real with each other, really we're doing a disservice to each other in terms of helping people kind of live to their fullest. They live in their shadow selves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And what I'm really hearing is the safety that you're creating here, you're encouraging us to do with one another, those of us listening, those in the community, and that is really what's needed to be able to support people and getting connected with help, just getting connected with each other, being able to be a positive support influence, connection for someone who's going through things like this, and to be able to open it up into other possibilities than what are currently being seen.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we don't realize is that when we talk about shame and we talk about stigma, we talk about it like it's a thing, like it's a physical barrier between us. But the reality is that how that really plays out is I have put that shame on as how I define myself. That's the shirt I put on in the morning, is the shame of these past things. So that then defines me as then not being worthy of being heard, not being valued, not being respected, not being seen. So I embody that. So it's something that I wear and I carry because those messages have been reinforced over and over and over again until I learn that it's okay to take that off. And that's not what's going to define me. And it's giving it, permission to kind of peel that layer off and see what's underneath that has been kind of covered up by those repeated messages. But shame and stigma is something I personalize and put on myself. That's what holds me back from seeking healing or seeking change.
Mm-hmm. It can be very, very, powerful, and it can interfere a whole lot.
It does. It gets in the way. It becomes part of your identity, right? So when people want to know who you are, it's like, let me dig through all of this mess, and then I can tell you some of the authentic things about me. But even some of that is really hard because you just grow to believe that these experiences are who you are. So then it's when you're trying to dig through the yuck to be okay, who am I really? That's who you feel like you are. But then it's well, I don't want people to know this stuff. So then you go back to these old habits of I'm going to fluff it a little bit, and I'm going to right? Like, it's not really like a big lie. It's just a little lie. And I would love to feel this way about myself. So what does it matter if these people like know that that's true or not? But it does, because you're just like, then I'm reinforcing that on myself. Like, nope, you're really this, and we can lie about this, and you just stay stuck.
Stuck. And that is definitely an aspect of all of this.
Oh, yeah.
At times. And you're offering the space to be able to move through that differently. So Jessica, how has your experiences with this in your life, from a very young age, witnessing substance use disorder and how that's impacted you and your family, how has that impacted your own relationship with substances and just your awareness of how it develops and how it really can play out in the family?
So I drink occasionally. I've never even tried anything else. It scares me. Growing up around it, right? Like I said, in my house, it was primarily like alcohol and marijuana. When I got older, when my dad was in his 50s, he started smoking meth. I'm not really sure how that happened, but it happened. And it always just kind of scared me. And I had a scare. I had moved to Sault Ste. Marie to go to college. I don't know if you guys have been to Sault Ste. Marie lately. There's nothing there. It's a college in the Sulaks, and I mean, there's a lot more there today than there was when I was there, but there's nothing there. But if you go downtown, there's about 12 bars lined up, all that were in like walking distance to the dorms, to my apartment. That's what we did. We drank. And I would go to work, and I would go to the bar, and I would sleep, and it was just this cycle. And I remember like talking to one of my friends that still lived in Harrison one day and thinking like, oh my God, it's happening, right? Like the one thing that I promised myself I would never let happen is happening. And I texted him and I was like, I think that I need to come home. Which is also weird for me because I swore I would never set foot back in Harrison, right? So then I was like, I think I have to come home. And I did. And he came and he helped me move. And I came back to Harrison because I was turning into the one thing that I didn't want to be. And it scared me. And it was exactly like if I would have stayed there, we would not be having this conversation. And I might be on the other side of those chairs in my office right now. It was getting pretty bad. And I mean, it sounds weird, but I have my dad to thank for that, right? I have my grandma and my uncle and people who I watched ruin their lives through this process to thank for that, because it was a giant smack in the face for me one day when I was like, you're going to lose everything. You've barely gotten started, but you're going to lose everything. And so I'm very mindful today when I go have drinks with my friends, that it's drinks with my friends. I'm very mindful that it's done responsibly, that I always have a backup plan, like all of the things, because it is not worth it to me to lose anything that I've worked so hard for.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Sounds like you had such an awareness around it that when it got to a point where it was feeling like it was too much or there was concern, that you were able to dial it back and do what you needed to do to take care of you. And now here you are offering other people that support and that hope from your very intensive experience of growing up with all of that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we are coming around to close this up, and we always like to ask our guests, well, first and foremost, I want to ask, is there anything else that's on your heart to share about this today before we go into our last question?
I just want people to know that I loved my dad. All of it. One of the last conversations I had with him, he was actually sober. He had gone to treatment for 11 days. Sam, you know how that works, right? First time through treatment, they're probably not going to get it. But he went, and it was the first time I think I'd ever talked to my dad substance free my entire life. So there was a want and hope and all, like, good in there. There are good memories, right? Like, the bad definitely outweighs the good. But he was sick, right? He was not provided any of the things that 1016 offers people right now. And if he would have been given some of those things, we might not be having this conversation. But he wasn't, and he wasn't ready for those things. He was not a bad person. He was sick, and I think that is the most powerful thing that I want anybody to take out of this, is that no matter what, right, like, he loved me the best that he knew how to do that. He loved my sisters the best that he knew how to do that. He wasn't a bad guy. He was sick, and he struggled, and that struggle ended up taking him away from us, which just really now, like, when I can think about all of the things, seems really unfair. But I loved him.
Absolutely. And wanting that love from your parent and that connection is so natural for all of us. And it also brings me to another question about what pieces of his story do you feel comfortable sharing that you feel like may have contributed to this for him?
My grandpa was also an alcoholic. My grandma was a drinker. I never really knew my dad's father, but I've heard that he was also an angry drunk. My dad and my uncle both dropped out of school very young. They started drinking at a very young age with my grandpa. Like, he grew up in a toxic environment too. And when that's what we learn, when that's what we're learning from, it's hard to come out of that on the other side. But there were times that, like, he tried to be a good dad. He just didn't know what he was doing.
Well, yes, we all come to parenting with no manual, although there are many books you can go buy and read. Not much of life is textbook incomplete, especially a role like parenting. Yeah. And then the other piece that sticks out to me as you're talking about this is just that desire for relief and connection that a substance can bring, even though it's temporary and it can wreak havoc on our lives. Sam, did you want to offer any more on that question?
Well, I think that's what gets lost in this, because it's so easy for us in our black and white thinking world, that particularly that we live in right now, that people want to think in the way that it's glamorized in media and whatnot, that it's all about getting high and it's, all that kind of glamorized stuff about the silly things that I'm doing when I'm under the influence. But the reality is that most folks who are using to that extent are doing it because there is these layers of brokenness that I have experienced, these layers of hurt that I've experienced, whether they're, repeated experiences with my parents or what have you. And so ongoing addiction issues is not driven by pleasure in the sense that we want to think that people are having a good time. And it really is much more so about the very complex, messy relationship that we have with this because of what it does for me inside, or what it allows me to do, because maybe I don't have the confidence to talk with people, and because I experienced shame or other kinds of things and couldn't interact with people, that by using this substance it allowed me to be a little bit more freer and then in my language and conversing and joking with people. But then as a result of that, I ended up having a real bad experience, whether it's a car wreck or being, experiencing sexual violence as a result of, misuse. And then it creates this snowball where there's more and more layers of complexity and hurt that kind of just steamroll the situation. And so as Jess talks about kind of peeling back those layers, that's what we don't, as normies, know how to create space for. We just want to do simple labels of a drunk or a junkie or something along that line, rather than understanding all the different things that that person has probably experienced in order to get to this place. And if it's taken them this long to get there, what's it going to take to untangle all of that at the same time? That healing process takes a long time. And we don't often know how to support that, or we get angry when there's a relapse. We get angry when they do unhealthy things, even though they may not be drinking anymore, but they're still a jerk parent or a jerk spouse. Well, I mean, again, that means they're still working on themselves. And we need to have space and grace for that healing process to work.
What would you like to share with a parent who's listening, who's struggling with substance use disorder and is hearing this and seeing maybe some of their family story along in this, and a child or a youth or a young adult who can relate to your story?
As like a parent, I would tell them, you could put your kids through the ringer and they are still going to love you. But it does not mean that your actions have not impacted them. So be real about that, right? Be real that there's work that needs to be done, but like your kid's never going to not love you. I don't even think that that's possible. And as a kid, like, man, if I could tell little Jessica something, it gets better. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really does. All those bad experiences, like, lead to something better if you let them. And just to, like, hold on, right? Like, if there's someone that you trust, like, go have those conversations. Like, go talk to somebody. Because being in a place where you feel like no one cares and your life's not worth living anymore, that's not worth it either.
There's people who will listen and people who care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Sam, do you have anything that you'd like to say to people who are listening that might be in those situations?
Just to add on to what Jess was saying is that more than likely this is not the first time you've had that itch or that inkling or that yuck or that stir. And it's easy to just wait until that discomfort is gone, because no one likes to feel yucky, right? What I can say is that there are people here who are ready to talk and ready to hear and ready to answer questions and ready to acknowledge. There's nothing that a person can say to us that will surprise us, make us go, "What? You did what?" There's nothing that you can say or do that we're going to judge and that we haven't heard before. We have seen miraculous things happen, and you can be the next one, because you don't have to let this situation define you. And in many ways, you can use it in order to kind of reframe where it can go in that positive way that deep down inside you want to be able to live a certain kind of life. And you're in this state of discontent, of falseness, of not being who you wanted to be, being the parent, the mom, the dad that you wanted to be. Well, it doesn't have to stay that way. You can be a different parent tomorrow. You can be a different parent today. And that starts just by walking through our door or picking up the phone. We're here and we're ready to talk. And we get it. We really get it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. All right. So as we close here, if there is one takeaway that you would like our listeners to remember from this conversation or what you're sharing today, what would that be?
One takeaway. I actually had to process the idea of doing this because growing up the way I grew up, it was very, what happens at home stays at home, right? Family business is family business, and it's nobody else's business, and we don't talk about it. And a good friend of mine told me, that's why you do it. You go share the family business, and you do it with respect, and you do it with as much dignity as you can, because somebody out there is feeling that same exact way. So as much as people feel like they're alone in some of the struggles that they're facing, you're not alone. People understand, people have been there, and even if we don't understand, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to help you and walk through that with you. And so just reach out and ask for help, and there are people that will do that for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. Sam?
I'm not going to compete with that.
All right.
That's the truth. I mean, that the point of this is what Jess said. That stands alone.
Right on. Thank you both for sharing your hearts with us today. And we look forward to when this is all ready for people to listen to.
Thanks for having us.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.